Hey guys, what's going on? This is Ed from vinylalbumcovers.com, and welcome to the Needle Drop. This is a brand new series that I'm going to try out on this channel where we focus not on the songs themselves, but the sonics. We're going to talk about engineering and mixing and mastering and all kinds of sonic things to hopefully help you to discover some new favorites and help you to maybe appreciate the albums that you own in a whole new way. Now I want to make it very clear, I am not an audiophile. It's a dirty word in my world. In other words, I don't just turn off something if it sounds bad. That's not enough to kill my enjoyment of anything. I love stuff that was done, I love Motown, which is not exactly audiophile quality stuff. I love stuff that was done even in decades prior that doesn't sound the greatest. To my view of enjoyment, music is about energy and it's about feeling. It doesn't have to be about sonics. If something doesn't sound great, that's okay. If the energy is there and if the feeling is there and the proficiency is there, although I don't always need the proficiency either, but I'd like it. But if those things are there, I'm good. Really, I am. So those things are, those are the things that are the most important to me. And sonics is, I do enjoy something that sounds great, but if it doesn't, that's okay. Paradise for me is when it all comes together. And with this particular album, it does. So the first thing we want to do is talk a little bit about, I'm just going to assume that some of you who are watching this video may not know exactly where I'm coming from, so I want to make it completely clear so that anybody that watches this video can enjoy it rather than just those of us who understand sound, because I want to include all of you. I want everyone to play. So here's how we're going to do this. So I have a couple of examples with me that are at my feet. And I'll show them to you in just a moment. So the first thing we want to talk about is how music is recorded. And this is very much a Cliff's Notes version. I'm not going to go into every minute detail. You don't really want me to do that. We'd be here for hours. But basically, we're going to do it from the standpoint of like what would have happened in 1988. There are minor exceptions, but in most cases, with most artists and most major record labels, music was still being recorded in analog. So that meant tape. Now let me show you something real quick as I duck down. So I have the kind of tape that would have been used back in 1988. This particular tape was actually used back in 1985. That's when this album was recorded. And this is actually just one of like 4 of them. Here's the tape. Look at this thing is hulking. It's absolutely ridiculously heavy. This is by a group called the Army Blues, if you're curious. It was many, many years ago. This was 85. And here is the tape. Now, this is, my gosh, this is heavy. That's what this is. But this is it. This is referred to as 2-inch tape. This is the kind of tape that would have been recorded on. Now, this particular tape has like a Velcro seal on it, but you can take it off, which I'm doing right now. It's going away. And it's basically there just to protect the tape, which is a good move. Now, this white stuff here is called leader. I'm not going to take this off because it should be there. It's actually, there's some tape on it to kind of keep it together. But if I took this off, I'm going to take this off because I think you'd be curious. I think you'd like me to take it off. So I'm going to start kind of unspooling it a bit. There's a whole lot of leader on this thing. That's what it's called. It's called leader. So I'm taking it off. There's actually a splice, and there's even more of it than there should be. Why is there so much of this? Sheesh. But it's coming. Okay, so here we go. So this is what the tape looks like. So this is like think of a cassette, right? although don't listen to one, just think of it. But this is thicker, just a bit thicker than cassette tape, and it's 2 inches. This is 2-inch tape, and it holds not 2 tracks like you're familiar with from a cassette. This holds 24 tracks. They also had variations earlier than this that held 16, but this is a 24 track recording reel. Is basically what this is. It's called a Grandmaster. You can see it there. This is really heavy, and this is Ampex 456. I won't go into details, but this is in 2023. This is not the stuff that you want to be dealing with, and there's reasons for that. If you're curious, for those who do know, this tape actually did transfer perfectly. It had to be baked before it was transferred, but it transferred perfectly, and it sounds every bit as incredible as it did the day it was recorded. So that is a big relief. That is not always the case with tapes like this. But so this tape will hold, I think it's like a half an hour, if I'm not mistaken. But this holds, like, for instance, holds all drums. For each of the 24 tracks has an instrument on it. I'm not gonna get too granular with it, but like the bass would be on 1 track, the guitar would be on 1 track, the keyboards would be on 2 tracks because stereo, right? So stereo left and right. However many keyboards are on the project, you would have, probably left and right of your keyboards. You would have a lead vocal, that would be 1 track. You'd have backing vocals, depending on how many you had, that would dictate how many tracks you needed, and so on and so forth. So you could fill, I'm still reeling up the tape, but you could fill 24 tracks fairly easily. We can only imagine what they must have done back in the days of 16 track, or 8, or 4, or 2. So those were a whole other thing. See, I told you I wasn't going to get granular, and I'm starting to do it, but I'm going to back off before it gets too crazy. But this is basically the tape on which an album would initially be recorded. All the instruments would come together on this tape. So this is the kind of thing that they'd be using. So once done recording on an album, gosh, this thing's heavy. So, and then putting it back in its box so nothing happens to it. So once done, after everything is recorded, obviously you need to find a way to get down to stereo left and right. And how do you do that? Well, that's easy. There's a process called mixing that occurs. In other words, it takes all of these elements, your drums, your bass, your guitar, whatever the band is, if there's strings or whatever, all of these elements are brought together in the mixing stage. They're all mixed together onto what's referred to as a 1/4-inch half-track reel. I happen to have one here. See, told you. But this is one of them. This is an example of a 1/4-inch half-track reel. Looks a bit like this. I won't unreel this, but you can see it's very, very thin, because it's only 1/4-inch tape. And this has stereo left and right on it. And this is basically the tape that would go, to get, this is the tape that would go to get mastered. That's what this is. This in particular isn't exactly that, but again, I don't want to get too granular about it. So, but that's basically what happens. Then the mastering engineer will get the whole thing, because remember, up until this point, everybody involved has been looking at individual tracks. They've been looking at, like, how do I get the best out of this song? And then when that song's done, how do I get the best out of this song? The next one, how do I get the best out of this song? So the engineer and the mixer are only thinking from song to song. They're not thinking about the sound of a whole album, because it's not really their job. The mastering engineer comes in and he thinks about the entire album, the way the whole thing sounds from beginning to end. And he's able to take however many songs, in this case we're talking with Bobby Brown, we're talking like 10, 11 songs, depending on which edition of the album you have. And the mastering engineer is thinking about, okay, how do I make all these songs sound good together? And his or her job is to make them all sound good together. That's what a mastering engineer does. And the mastering engineer is also the last line of defense if there's like a problem, if there's a sonic issue. He can take care of those things. In fact, it's very common at this point because a lot of people record their albums digitally in their bedrooms or in bedroom-like equipment, because Logic Pro and Pro Tools are very easy to get now. They're very inexpensive, and people just use those things. And people who are not engineers, who don't truly understand how to record, will record their projects and then send them off to a real mastering engineer. The mastering engineer basically has to deal with the mess and has to fix it all. So that happens more times than I care to count. So kids, if you're making albums, learn how to engineer. You'll be happy that you did. It'll make your lives a lot simpler and your project will sound better. This has been a public service announcement. Okay, so that's kind of like major Cliff's Notes about how albums are recorded. Certainly would have been the case in 1988. That was kind of the tail end of analog recording. Things, of course, are now done digitally, and instead of thinking in terms of 24 tracks, they don't have to think, nobody has to think in those terms anymore. Tracks are infinite. Remember, there's an artist out there now who's fantastic named Jacob Collier, and he will do songs with upwards of 500 tracks, which is just bananas. I don't know how he keeps track of all of it because he does his own engineering and mixing. He does use a separate mastering engineer, thank goodness, but he does all that on his own and is a really good engineer. And he does do bedroom recording, but he's great at it. So it doesn't matter. But that's where we are now in 2023. Things are digital now. We're not thinking in terms of tapes. Now we're thinking in terms of hard drives and so on and so forth. So anyway, with that out of the way, now we're going to talk about this absolutely incredible album, the one right over here. This is Don't Be Cruel by Bobby Brown. Now, my first experience with this record was on a cassette. I still remember where I got the cassette too. I got it at a Record World at what used to be Ballston Commons Mall in Arlington, Virginia. Neither the mall nor the record store exist any longer. Now it's Ballston Quarter and Record World is gone. R.I.P. But I got the cassette because it was cheap. It's like $8, I think. And the CD was like $13 at the time. I think like $13 or $14. And I just didn't have I didn't have the Skrilla. I just didn't have the money for it. So I got the cassette. I remember thinking when I got the cassette home, I was listening to it on the way home on my Walkman thingy. I think it was a Toshiba. It was great. Things sounded amazing. As amazing as cassettes are going to sound, which isn't all that amazing. But this album, even on cassette, it was on one of those MCA Hi-Q cassettes, if you guys remember those. And it had Dolby B on it and the whole nine. And Dolby's a discussion for another day. But it sounded really good, and I could tell, even though it was a cassette, I hate cassettes. I hate them. But that's how I initially had Don't Be Cruel by Bobby Brown. And I realized, even in listening to that cassette, that it could be great. And I knew I wasn't getting it the way I should be getting it. I knew that it probably sounded better than the cassette did. And the cassette actually sounded pretty good. For a pre-recorded cassette, it wasn't bad. There was tons of hiss because cassettes. But other than that, it actually sounded pretty good. And so I endeavored that I would enjoy that cassette for a little while, and then as soon as I could, I was going to go back there and get the CD because I really wanted the CD. Just because, and the tunes, like, my gosh. I mean, this is not an album review video, but the tunes, sheesh. So anyway, maybe 3 months later or so, I saved up my Skrilla, if you will. And I went back there and I bought the CD. I got the CD home. I didn't have a Discman yet, but I got the CD home to listen to it, and it blew my mind. It's an incredible sounding album. It really, really is. I since have gotten the LP. I got the LP, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or something like that. The LP sounds every bit as good as the CD does. Every bit. It's just a beautiful, beautiful sounding album. You know, MFSL, Mobile Fidelity, Sound Labs, and the others are never going to give this any attention. It's never going to come out that way, I promise you. It'd be nice if it did, but it's never going to happen. And I'm sure you've noticed, but R&B has gotten tremendously short shrift when it comes to, you know, remastered reissues and things of that sort. And by that I mean like stuff that comes out on Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs or music on vinyl or Friday Music or Rhino or you know, any of the audiophile issuers. They really don't pay much attention to R&B. There's so little of it. I remember there was a Super Audio CD years ago by a group called the OJs. The album was Ship Ahoy. It's right over there. You can look at it if you like. And they basically took the old quad that was released back in the 70s. There were quadraphonic reissues in the 70s, and they sounded really, really nice. Some of them did. Some of them were trash, but some of them actually sounded very good. And this one sounds really good. And so they took it and repurposed it for Super Audio CD, and the results are pretty stunning. I mean, you can, if you look online, you can still find it. It's like $175, I think that was one of the ones I saw, but very, very expensive. But other than that, and Michael Jackson's Thriller, which has been reissued a bunch of times, that also came out on Super Audio CD back when it was new, and it's come out on Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab, and then they did like a Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab one step, which is right over there. You can look at that. Comes in a box. It's like $100, and it comes in a box. And I have read the reviews of it and am less than impressed. The version that's on the website that I have is an original CBS half-speed mastered, and that thing sounds phenomenal. I love the way it sounds. But anyway, tangential again, sorry, my apologies. My point is that R&B is largely ignored by the audiophile community. It gets very, very little love, and it's such a shame because there's some really great R&B out there, and that's what this series is going to focus on. It is not going to focus on The Night Fly by Donald Fagen or Kind of Blue by Miles Davis or anything Steely Dan or anything Santana or the classic rock stuff, the old war horses that come out over and over and over and over again. I don't have any interest in those things. Other people can focus on those things if they wish. I'm here to talk about great sounding, sonically great sounding R&B. And so that's what this series is going to be about. And that is why we are talking about Don't Be Cruel by Bobby Brown, because it's just that good. So I wanted to kind of run down some things for you with regards to the people responsible for making it sound as good as it does. First person we should talk about is Steve Hall. Steve Hall worked for Future Disc Systems. He's responsible for the mastering of a lot of MCA CDs back in the day, and a lot of the stuff that LA and Babyface did, he's responsible for mastering, and it sounds incredible. He's a great mastering engineer. It's just yeah, it speaks for itself. John Gass was the engineer of choice for LA and Babyface back then, and he's just great. He's so good. Like anything that was done by LA and Babyface back then was probably engineered by John Gass, or like Barney Perkins or somebody like that. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was all John Gass. But just beautifully, beautifully done. Of course, the production is part of the sound too, and that's LA and Babyface on the things that sound the best on this album. The Teddy Riley tracks don't sound terrible at all. I'll Be Good to You sounds good. My Prerogative sounds good. Yes, I know the credit is given to Gene Griffin, but it doesn't belong there. It belongs to Teddy Riley. Sorry. Larry White, who's the holdover from the King of Stage record, the first album Bobby Brown put out, his stuff sounds pretty good too. The album as a whole just sounds really nice. It's really even. Steve did a great job of making it all sound of a piece, like, okay, let me give you an example. So if you listen to like Rock With You, for instance, the quality of that, the way the drums come in, the stereo separation in them, the way they kind of bounce from left to right, the dynamics in them, they're just beautifully recorded. And then when those, when the DX7s come at the keyboards and all those other things, when those come in the string patch, and it just sounds phenomenal. It's just a phenomenal sounding tune, sonically speaking. And then Bobby's lead comes in, and it's perfectly placed, just beautifully recorded and mixed. And that's true of everything that LA and Face did on that record. I mean, I can't say enough about how good Don't Be Cruel sounds, the song, or Every Little Step, or Roni. Like, they're just such great sounding songs. The other things don't sound as good, but that doesn't mean they don't sound good. They do. The whole album sounds great. So it's one of those that really kind of deserves a second look sonically. So if you haven't heard it in a while, do yourself a favor, like really listen to it. And I don't mean in the car either, although you'd still get the hint in the car. But like, go home, like be at home in front of your stereo, put the CD in, because the CD is good enough to give you the picture. The CD will do the trick, I promise. And then just listen to the way it sounds. It's incredible. It really is an incredible sounding album. And if you put headphones in, forget it. Like, if you've got some halfway decent headphones, you don't even need great headphones for these. Like, if you have any over-the-ear headphone, don't do it with earbuds. But the ones I use are good for that, because those are amazing earbuds. But even then, I much prefer over-the-ear headphones for that kind of thing. So if you have like a good pair of Sennheisers, put them over a good pair of Sonys, like, or whatever your headphone of choice is, as long as it isn't Beats by Dre. Like, please no, those things are awful. But if you or those Apples, like anything sound with Apple is busted. I'm sorry. I love Apple. I love Macs. This is edited on a Mac, but the sound on a Mac is awful, just awful. Apple sound is terrible. So don't get those their headphones. I can't even remember what they're called. They're what are they called? I forget. It doesn't matter. They're called, don't buy them. That's what they're called. Don't buy them. But get some good headphones and listen to this thing. And don't do it Bluetooth. Like, plug in. It sounds phenomenal. You'll just get lost in the way it sounds. This album absolutely tickles the eardrums, and I could not recommend it highly enough. Just for its sonic properties. So take a listen and tell me what you think in the comments. Like, load up the comments and tell me if you feel the same way, because I really enjoy listening to this record just because of how good it sounds. Flowers to John Gass, flowers to Steve Hall. Let me look and see if there's anybody else, because I don't think that there is. Fred Howard, who's an assistant engineer on the record. He certainly deserves flowers. Howard Johnson, who's responsible for the Larry White things, he certainly deserves his flowers too. So there's, Ruben Laksamana, who's another engineer just on the 8th track, which is a Larry White thing. Mark Slagle, also the Larry White tracks. So just flowers to all of you. I offer all of you flowers. Just a great sounding album on the whole. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks for kind of watching me flail through this. I haven't done one of these yet. I'm kind of just figuring it out while I go. So thank you for putting up with it. I appreciate it. There will be many more like this. I've got like 12 others here that I'm ready to go for. So I'm going to dive into them. If you liked the video, tell me that you did. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel, because I've got lots more coming. And thank you very much for watching, and until we see each other next time, well, I won't see you, but you'll see me. You get the point. Until the next video, keep listening to great music.